Kehilat Shalom. So, for some reason, over the last few weeks, I've discussed a couple of times how I love to watch Judge Judy. And this was a case I saw many, many years ago. And it was a pretty interesting case. So, a woman had rented the upstairs apartment in a duplex, right? And this actually took place on Long Island, where that's fairly common. You have a two-family home, right? And separate apartments, the upper floor and the lower floor, and the owner lives in one and rents out another. And in this case, the renter lived upstairs. She rented it from a married couple, and then the married couple subsequently separated, and the husband moved out. Okay, and she had no heat for several months, and she would call the husband who had moved out, because he owned the building, and he would call the utility company to come and fix the heat. And so somebody would come from the utility company, they'd knock on the first floor door, and where the now estranged wife, who doesn't own the house, but she lives there, so they knock on the door, she answers, "Are you the owner of the house?" And she says, "No." "Do you have heat in your house?" And she says, "Yes." So the utility company says, "We went there, we found no problem," and they go home. And this happens several times, right? And meanwhile, the poor woman upstairs, who's the renter, still has no heat, right? So she decided that the only way she was gonna get this fixed is to sue them, right? So she sues both members of the couple, and when the judge questioned the estranged wife, everything that I just said she did, she acknowledged that she did, and she said, legally, I didn't do anything wrong, right? Because I answered the questions which were asked of me, and I answered them accurately, right? Which is true. Are you the owner? No, I'm not. Do you have heat? Yes, I do. Okay, so now, I suspect she knew what was going on, right? But go prove the state of mind of another person, right? And legally, there was no way that the judge could hold her accountable. Right now, I discussed in my 2-minute Torah the question, right? Because we have this sentence, the very beginning of the Parashat, Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya bidorotav. Right? These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man in his generation. Right? And the question is that damning by faint praise, or is it expert praise, right? In other words, right? Noah was so righteous that even though he lived among a generation of evil people, he was still righteous. Or does it mean, compared to everybody else, he was righteous, right? But by an objective standard, not so much. It reminds me of this story about this guy who died, and he was a terrible, terrible, horrible, horrible person. And the rabbi didn't know him. And at the graveside, the rabbi says, "We're not going to conclude the funeral until somebody says something good about the deceased. There's nothing, right? Finally, somebody raises it and says, his brother was even worse. Right? So the question is, right, so does he qualify as objectively good or only comparatively good? And there was a commentator named Al-Sheikh, and again, the connection between Hebrew and Arabic says Noah, he takes a very clear stand. Noah was righteous only by the standards of his generation, not by any objective sense. And he compares Noah unfavorably to Abraham. Okay, so I read the first sentence. Noah, these are the generations of Noah. He was a righteous man in his generation. The second sentence in the Parashat is Et ha-Elohim hitalech Noah. Noah walked with God. Okay, but about Abraham, in the next Parsha, God says, Lech lifanai, walk before me, right? Not with me, but before me. And if you think about it, so what happens with Noah and the flood? God comes to Noah and says, there's going to be a flood. Everybody but you and your family has been destroyed. So go build an ark. And what does Noah say in response? What does he say? I think I heard somebody hesitantly give the right answer. What is it? What does Noah say? He doesn't say anything at all. He says nothing. God says, I'm going to kill everybody but you and your family. Go build an ark. Noah says nothing. He goes and he builds an ark, right? 10 generations later, God says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? What does Abraham say? Don't do that. Don't do that, right? It's not fair. Right? You're going to kill the righteous along with the wicked. Save the city because of the righteous people. It turns out, all right, so there's no righteous people, right? But nevertheless, Abraham at least tried, right? So Noah walked with God. He was concerned about his relationship with God. That was the extent of his spirituality. Abraham, God says, live on, I walk before me, right? Not with me. In other words, like Abraham is a toddler. I mean, Noah is a toddler, right? God, you walk with God because God's got to hold his hand. He's a toddler. Abraham walked before me. He is on a higher level because he can be independent. Why? Because Abraham is focused not only on his relationship with God, but he's focused on other people as well, right? So obedience may be a virtue, but it's not the only virtue, right? I mean, was Noah obedient? Yes, he was obedient, right? God said, build an ark. He built an ark. you can't really fault him, right? He didn't do anything wrong, right? The utility repair guy came and asked, do you own the house? No. Do you have heat? Yes. She didn't do anything wrong. But she could have done better, right? She could have said, yeah, I have heat, but the tenant upstairs doesn't, right? But, right, she wanted to get even with her husband, but she got even with her husband, but it was the tenant who really suffered, right? So obedience is not the only virtue, right? If God wanted simply obedience from human beings, we don't need free will. We don't need free will. We should be robots, right? A whole world populated by obedient robots who do everything they're told, right? But that's not what God wants, right? God creates human beings who think and reason and have free will. And sometimes we say to God, what you want to do is not right, right? Think again. And sometimes we disobey. And sometimes disobedience is bad, but sometimes disobedience is good, right? I mean, as Abraham Joshua Heschel said, in a free country, some are guilty, but all are responsible, right? And as Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is indifference, right? And so sometimes, I believe I told this story once before, but to me, it's a really important story. I have a friend named Aryeh, and he was in the Israeli army in 1982 during the first Lebanon War. Okay, when he told me this story, it was like 1986, so, not so long ago. And now, I mean, I have to say, I was in Israel as a very young adult. I was in Israel during that war, and to me, that war still seems like yesterday, right? But 1982, 18 and 24, 42 years ago, right? So long. Anyway, so my friend Aryeh was in a unit called Handasa Kravit. Handasa Kravit means combat engineering. Okay, so I asked Aryeh, what is combat engineering? We blow stuff up, right? That's what combat engineering is. So they get to a village in Lebanon, and all the inhabitants have fled north, right? Because they know the Israeli army is coming. They flee north, and at pristine, empty village. And the commander of the unit says, oh, this is excellent, right? We can practice. We can blow up a bunch of houses in the village and not injure anybody because everybody's fled, right? And my friend Aryeh goes to his commander, the commander of the unit, and Aryeh's a private. He says, you know, and I know that what you are telling us to do is against IDF regulations. So, A, I'm not doing this. And B, if you nevertheless have us do this, I'm reporting you up the chain of command. And what do you think happened? They didn't do it, right? They didn't do it because one soldier spoke up and said, this is wrong, right? I mean, imagine, talk about our own country's history. Imagine if one soldier had spoken up at My Lai, right? All it takes is one, because the US Army has the appropriate regulations. The Israeli Army has the appropriate regulations. But as we have learned not so long ago, rules and regulations and constitutions are not self-performative, right? People have to stand up for them. They have to stand up for the rule of law. They have to stand up for humanity. They have to stand up for other people, right? And look, this principle was established at Nuremberg, right? I was just following orders. I was just following orders. Well, guess what? Sorry, doesn't fly. Right? Sorry, doesn't fly. There's the gallows, right? Or there's the prison cell, right? Just following orders, right? And in that sense, I'm not comparing Noah, God forbid, to the people who were convicted at Nuremberg, right? But Noah was also just following orders. And Abraham said, no, I'm not following orders, because the orders you are giving are wrong. And God said, oh, yeah, right? Because as I said a couple of weeks ago, right, the God of the Torah learns. The God of the Torah said, oh, yeah, Abraham, actually, you got a good point. I won't do it. Moses, you have a good point. I won't do it, right? And that's why we're B'nai Abraham and not just B'nai Noah, right? Because we come from a tradition that says, speak truth to power, even if that power is God. And sometimes we are called upon to not just follow orders and say no. And that's the lesson that Al-Sheikh teaches us from the contrast between Abraham and Noah. Shabbat Shalom. And we continue with the Kaddish before Musa.